Hello podcast listeners, this is a new episode of the Gerard Brennan Disorder podcast, and this is the theme music. The summer holidays have started, but I have a very rare moment of solitude in my house. My sister-in-law has taken the boys to a little summer scheme thing, and the girls are away shopping in Belfast, so I'm all on my own-io and have a little bit of time to read. Although when I say I'm on my own, that's never really the truth in this house, because I think there might be a cat hiding under the bed, and there's the dog downstairs who is primed for barking, and the other two cats will probably be scratching at the door at some point. But what can you do? You can't wait around forever for perfect conditions, you just have to go with what you can go with. But I am grateful to have this little bit of time, and it's been a week now since my last podcast, so I thought it was only right that I should use the time to update you guys a little bit. Now, as I said earlier, it is the summer holidays, so you may hear some of the neighbourhood kids hollering. In fact, you're more likely to hear one of their mums shouting at them to hurry up or slow down or watch the road or something like that. I had to delay starting the recording because some wee guy called Harry was getting shouted at by his mum. Hopefully he has started listening to her, because I was done listening to her. I was delighted yesterday when I was listening to the Two Crime Writers on a Microphone podcast. That's the one run by Steve Kavanagh and Luca Veste. They were really kind and they gave me a shout out on their show. They talked about me in glowing terms, which was really, really nice. Very good for the old ego. At the time I was trying to catch a sneaky nap, and I was kind of drifting in and out a wee bit. So I'm going to give the whole thing another listen. I missed a few snatches of the Mark Billingham interview. But it was a really nice tribute they paid to me. Would you call it a tribute? Maybe. I don't know. I'm the writer. I'm supposed to know about things like words, but sometimes I use the wrong stuff in the wrong place. We're all only human. Doesn't matter if you've got a PhD or a master's or what. You're still going to make mistakes, but I subscribe to the thought that as long as people can understand you, if you're not confusing people, then you're communicating perfectly effectively, and that's fine. So, hopefully you aren't confused. But I just want to say a big thank you to Steve and Luca for that shout out. I noticed yesterday I got a few extra downloads after that, and hopefully as more people listen to their podcast, they'll get a few more. Which makes this, whole thing much more worth doing, and it makes me want to keep on doing it. Today my plan is to read something a little bit different. I've been a fan of Edgar Allan Poe since the Simpsons cartoon did a Treehouse of Horror episode in which Homer was thwarted by the Raven, who was played by Bart. I love Homer's reading. I think it's even better than Christopher Walken's or James Earl Jones's version of the reading, and I look at it on YouTube every once in a while. It's a lot of fun. They also, in another Treehouse of Horror episode, they did The Telltale Heart, and Lisa was the narrator for that. And that's the story I think I'm going to read today. I'm going to do The Raven another time, because I really like that poem, but I felt like doing some prose instead, and I thought I might follow that up with some really, really old short stories from my own canon that I wrote a long time ago when I was still trying to be sort of a horror writer with his tongue stuck firmly in his cheek. You'll sort of get to know what I mean about that when I start reading those stories. But we'll warm you up with a wee bit of Eddie, as I affectionately call him. I actually have a tattoo of Edgar Allan Poe on my right arm. It's a really nice tattoo. It's also a caricature of him, which I thought was kind of a nice touch, because I was introduced to his work through a cartoon, and I thought, it's nice to have your influences and all, but sometimes you just shouldn't take life too seriously, so, I put that there. He kind of serves as a reminder to not end up dead in a gutter, penniless, because I have responsibilities. I have a wife and I've got children, and I can't afford to do that to them. It also reminds me that I should keep on writing, because I think part of the reason Edgar Allan Poe came to such a sad end was probably because he had stopped creating, But his work lives on though, and he is an inspiration to many. He's also said to be one of the inventors of detective fiction, which is interesting. I think there was some Chinese guy that did crime fiction stories before him, but as far as English speaking writers go, I think he is the King Daddy. So, he in turn inspired the Sherlock Holmes books, who inspired everybody else that came along after, and yeah, I guess we all owe him a little debt of gratitude. So, allow me to entertain you with The Telltale Heart by Edgar Allan Poe. True, nervous, very, very dreadfully nervous I had been and am, but why will you say that I am mad? The disease had sharpened my senses, not destroyed, nor not dulled them. Above all was the sense of hearing acute. I heard all things in the heaven and in the earth. I heard many things in hell. How then am I mad? Hearken and observe how healthily, how calmly I can tell you the whole story. It is impossible to say how first the idea entered my brain, but once conceived it haunted me day and night. Object there was none. Passion there was none. I loved the old man. He had never wronged me. He had never given me insult. For his gold I had no desire. I think it was his eye. Yes, it was this. One of his eyes resembled that of a vulture, a pale blue eye with a film over it. Wherever it fell upon me, my blood ran cold, and so by degrees, very gradually, I made up my mind to take the life of the old man, and thus rid myself of the eye forever. Now this is the point. You fancy me mad? Madmen know nothing. But you should have seen me. You should have seen how wisely I proceeded, with what caution, with what foresight, with what dissimulation I went to work. I was never kinder to the old man than during the whole week before I killed him. And every night about midnight I turned the latch of his door and opened it, oh, so gently. And then, when I had made an opening sufficient for my head, I put in a dark lantern, all closed so that no light shone out. And then I thrust in my head. Oh, you would have laughed to see how cunningly I thrust it in. I moved it slowly, very, very slowly, so that I might not disturb the old man's sleep. It took me an hour to place my whole head within the opening so far that I could see him as he lay upon his bed. Ha! Would a madman have been so wise as this? And then, when my head was all well in the room, I undid the lantern cautiously. Oh, so cautiously, for the hinges creaked. I undid it just so much that a single thin ray fell upon the vulture eye. And this I did for 7 long nights. Every night, just at midnight. But I found the eye always closed, and so it was impossible to do the work, for it was not the old man who vexed me, but his evil eye. And every morning, when the day broke, I went boldly into the chamber and spoke courageously to him, calling him by name in a hearty tone, and inquiring how he had passed the night. So you see, he would have been a very profound old man indeed to suspect that every night, just at 12, I looked upon him while he slept. Upon the 8th night, I was more than usually cautious in opening the door. A watch's minute hand moves more quickly than did mine. Never before that night had I felt the extent of my own powers, of my sagacity. I could scarcely contain my feelings of triumph. To think that I was opening the door little by little, and he not even to dream of my secret deeds or thoughts. I fairly chuckled at the idea, and perhaps he heard me, for he moved on the bed suddenly as if startled. Now you may think that I drew back, but no. His room was as black as pitch, with the thick darkness, for the shutters were close fastened, through fear of robbers. And so I knew that he would not see the opening of the door, and I kept pushing it on steadily. I had my head in and was about to open the lantern, when my thumb slipped upon the tin fastening, and the old man sprang up in the bed, crying out, "Who's there?" I kept quiet, still, and said nothing. For a whole hour I did not move a muscle, and in the meantime I did not hear him lie down. He was still sitting up in the bed, listening, just as I have done, night after night, hearkening to the death watches in the wall. Presently I heard a slight groan, and I knew it was the groan of mortal terror. It was not a groan of pain nor of grief, oh no, it was the low stifled sound that arises from the bottom of the soul when overcharged with awe. I knew the sound well. Many a night, just at midnight, when all the world slept, it has welled up from my own bosom, deepening with its dreadful echo the terrors that distracted me. I say I knew it well. I knew what the old man felt and pitied him, although I chuckled at heart. I knew that he had been lying awake ever since the first slight noise when he had turned in the bed. His fears had been ever since growing upon him. He had been trying to fancy them causeless, but could not. He had been saying to himself, "It is nothing but the wind in the chimney, it is only a mouse crossing the floor," or, "It is merely a cricket that has made a single chirp." Yes, he has been trying to comfort himself with these suppositions, but he has found all in vain, because death in approaching him had stalked with his black shadow before him and enveloped the victim, and it was the mournful influence of the unperceived shadow that caused him to feel, although he neither saw nor heard, to feel the presence of my head within the room. When I had waited a long time very patiently without hearing him lie down, I resolved to open a very, very little crevice in the lantern. So I opened it, you cannot imagine how stealthily, until at length a single dim ray, like the thread of the spider, shot from the crevice and full upon the vulture eye. It was open, wide open, and I grew furious as I gazed upon it. I saw with perfect distinctness, all a dull blue, with a hideous veil over it that chilled the very marrow in my bones. But I could see nothing else of the old man's face or person, for I had directed the ray, as if by instinct, precisely upon the damned spot. And now, have I not told you that what you mistake for madness is but over-acuteness of the senses? Now I say there came to my ears a low, dull, quick sound, such as a watch makes when enveloped in cotton. I knew that sound well, too. It was the beating of the old man's heart. It increased my fury, as the beating of a drum stimulates the soldier into courage. But even yet I refrained and kept still. I scarcely breathed. I held the lantern motionless. I tried how steadily I could maintain the ray upon the eye. Meantime the hellish tattoo of the heart increased. It grew quicker and louder every instant. The old man's terror must have been extreme. It grew louder, I say, louder every moment. Do you mark me well? I have told you that I am nervous, so I am. And now, at the dead hour of the night, amid the dreadful silence of that old house, so strange a noise as this excited me to uncontrollable terror. Yet for some minutes longer I refrained and stood still. But the beating grew louder. I thought the heart must burst, and now a new anxiety seized me. The sound would be heard by a neighbour. The old man's hour had come. With a yell, I threw open the lantern and leaped into the room. He shrieked once only. In an instant I dragged him to the floor and pulled the heavy bed over him. I then smiled gaily to find the deed so far done. But for many minutes the heart beat on with a muffled sound. This, however, did not vex me. It would not be heard through the wall. At length it ceased. The old man was dead. I removed the bed and examined the corpse. Yes, he was stone dead. I placed my hand upon the heart and held it there many minutes. There was no pulsation. He was stone dead. His eye would trouble me no more. If still you think me mad, you will think so no longer when I describe the wise precautions I took for the concealment of the body. The night waned, and I worked hastily, but in silence. First of all, I dismembered the corpse. I cut off the head and the arms and the legs. I then took up 3 planks from the flooring of the chamber and deposited all between the scantlings. I then replaced the board so cleverly, so cunningly, that no human eye, not even his, could have detected anything wrong. There was nothing to wash out, no stain of any kind, no blood spot whatever. I had been too wary for that. A tub had caught all. Ha! Ha! When I had made an end of these labours, it was 4 o'clock, still dark as midnight. As the bell sounded the hour, there came a knocking at the street door. I went down to open it with a light heart, for what had I now to fear? There entered 3 men who introduced themselves with perfect suavity as officers of the police. A shriek had been heard by a neighbour during the night. Suspicion of foul play had been aroused. Information had been lodged at the police office, and they, the officers, had been deputed to search the premises. I smiled, for what had I to fear? I bade the gentleman welcome. The shriek, I said, was my own in a dream. The old man I mentioned was absent in the country. I took my visitors all over the house. I bade them search well. I led them at length to his chamber. I showed them his treasures, secure, undisturbed. In the enthusiasm of my confidence, I brought chairs into the room and desired them here to rest from their fatigues, while I myself, in the wild audacity of my perfect triumph, placed my own seat upon the very spot beneath which reposed the corpse of the victim. The officers were satisfied. My manner had convinced them. It was singularly at ease. They sat, and while I answered cheerily, then chatted familiar things. But ere long I felt myself getting pale, and wished them gone. My head ached, and I fancied a ringing in my ears, but still they sat and still chatted. The ringing became more distinct. It continued and became more distinct. I talked more freely to get rid of the feeling, but it continued and gained definitiveness, until at length I found that the noise was not within my ears. No doubt I now grew pale, but I talked more fluently, and with a heightened voice, yet the sound increased, and what could I do? It was a low, dull, quick sound, much such a sound as a watch makes when enveloped in cotton. I gasped for breath, and yet the officers heard it not. I talked more quickly, more vehemently, but the noise steadily increased. I arose and argued about trifles in a high key with violent gesticulations, but the noise steadily increased. Why would they not be gone? I paced the floor to and fro with heavy strides, as if excited to fury by the observation of the men, but the noise steadily increased. Oh God, what could I do? I foamed, I raved, I swore. I swung the chair upon which I had been sitting and grated it upon the boards, but the noise arose over all and continually increased. It grew louder, 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 and still the men chatted pleasantly and smiled. Was it possible they heard not? Almighty God, no. They heard, they suspected, they knew, they were making a mockery of my horror. This I thought, and this I think, and anything was better than this agony. Anything was more tolerable than this derision. I could bear those hypocritical smiles no longer. I felt that I must scream or die. And now again, hark, louder, 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 louder. Villains! I shrieked. Dissemble no more. I admit the deed. Tear up the planks. Here, it is the beating of his hideous heart. So that was a cheery wee number to keep you company on your drive to work, or while you're doing your dishes or cutting the grass. I hope you enjoyed it. It's one of them stories, it's just such a classic that, you could read it over and over again. And I do read it quite often. I read it more so than a lot of the other stories, particularly because it's kind of short. And there's something about that tale as well. When you read it out loud, it has a certain flow to it. If I remember right from a wee bit of extra reading about Edgar Allan Poe, he used to be called upon at parties and gatherings to recite his poem, The Raven, by heart, and he used to do it in a very dramatic manner. And I kind of feel that maybe he was one of those writers who would have read all of his stories out loud, because there is that dramatic flow to them. There's that real sense of rhythm, that you get from normal conversational kind of performance. So I think that adds a little something to the stories, and it makes them more pleasant to read and to read out loud. And hopefully it makes it pleasant to hear them as well. But we'll see. Man, the heat here is crazy today. I have my windows closed to try and keep out some of the noise from, my neighbours and things like that. I also have the curtains closed, and I'm in a room with a carpet and a bed and all that stuff, and it's getting really stuffy, and I feel like I'm a little bit more short of breath than I usually am. I hope that's not bugging you guys too much. I really must get a good mic with a pop filter on it or something, because I think that would reduce that a wee bit. But as it stands, I'm just going to have to try and control my breathing a little bit better, try and get a little less excited as I speak to you. And maybe I'm losing a bit of my cardio, my hard-fought cardio, because I haven't been to the gym for a few days. Although I didn't have a completely lazy weekend or anything. I mean, it's only Monday now. Yesterday I did an extra bit of sleeping, like I mentioned previously. I had a nap. But I'm really determined these days to battle my insomnia. So I've been working hard to get more sleep than I normally would. I bought one of those cheap little Fitbit rip-offs that is supposed to count up your sleep as well. I've no idea what way it does it, but you know, when you look at your app the next day, it tells you how many hours you were asleep and how many hours of that was deep sleep and how much was light sleep. And I have moved my average night's sleep up to 8 hours and 10 minutes, which is fantastic for me. This is a guy that routinely got 4 hours of sleep a night because I would have stayed up late to write and then got up early to go to work. And, you know, we had kids in the house and stuff like that, so I was really burning the candle at both ends and blowtorch in the middle of it. But it's not the way I want to live anymore. I've heard too much stuff about how if you don't get enough sleep, it can seriously affect your mood and your brain and stuff like that. It can also be the cause of Alzheimer's later on in life, you know, because the deep sleep part of your sleep cycle is when you're supposed to be doing repair to your brain cells, when you're clearing out the junk that's clogging up the filter of your thought channels or whatever you want to call it. And I really want to be around for a long time, you know. I love being a writer and I want to write long into my elderly years. Like I said earlier, I don't want to die young like Edgar Allan Poe did. I want to live long and I want to continue to produce work. Kind of like Donald Westlake did. I think he wrote right up into his 80s before he died, and I admire that, you know. He has a great body of work that he left behind. And he was a fantastic writer, so that's something I want to emulate. So that's part of the reason why I do all those crazy things like boxing and jiu-jitsu and walks, and I go through phases where I eat very healthily. But in this heat lately I've been eating so much ice cream it's not even funny. I'm just eating and eating and eating at the minute, and I've packed on a couple of extra pounds. But that's going to be useful because I plan to go to Harrogate this year, the crime fiction festival in Yorkshire, the Old Peculiar Crime Writing Festival, I think it is. And that usually involves 2 solid days of drinking, so I don't want to be super skinny and end up a lightweight under the table in the beer tent. I need to have a little more meat on my bones so that I can flood it with alcohol. So, yeah, I'm in training to be a better drinking machine, and then when I get back from holidays I'll lose a little bit of weight again, because I can do that. It's not that hard. Guess I'm kind of lucky genetically, or my determination helps or something, but when I really, really want to, I can lose weight, and in this heat it's just no fun carrying any extra pounds at all. Anyhow, I'm sort of wandering off into uncharted territory there. What I wanted to follow up the Edgar Allan Poe story with was a couple of short stories from a collection I wrote many moons ago. This little pamphlet book was called Possession, Obsession and a Diesel Compression Engine. And it comprised of 6 short stories, all sort of linked to the Fireproof universe, which is where some of my crazier tales have taken place. So the first one is quite a short one. I think it would qualify as flash fiction, and I shall do that for you right now. Bloodbath by Gerard Brennan. He lay in his bath of blood and sang O Fortuna at the top of his voice. The blood had cooled and clotted, and he felt far too comfortable to be bothered with scraping off and getting dressed. This was the only time he had to himself away from the office politics and embezzlement investigations. He wanted it to last for as long as possible. Besides, this one had taken more effort to fill than previous baths. His muscles still ached from the exertion. The best bathing blood had to be extracted from frightened accountants. The easy part had always been scaring them. He just told them that there was a problem with the bottom line or gave them a debit-heavy balance sheet. The tough part was catching them. Those chaps worried so much they had built up an unhealthy supply of nervous energy. As soon as they got the adrenaline rush, they moved like lightning. Skinny fellows they were too, very hard to hold on to when they squirmed. This particular bath had taken him a whole day to collect for. The effort of the chase, the strength expelled, twisting the accountants from their ankles to their necks, holding them upside down over the bath. It vexed. The only motivation, when under such a strain, was the promise of that pop. The sweet sound of a head letting go when it reached the maximum point of elasticity. And the splashback refreshed him so much he was always able to twist one more. Corny but true. The harder you worked at something, the sweeter the reward. He relaxed and thought about the time he tried to fill the bath with lawyer blood. Now there was a lazy species. It took barely 3 hours to gather enough of them to fill his bath to the brim. Such a slovenly bunch. Not one of them tried to run or even struggle in his grip. Half of them attempted to bargain their way out of it with a jumble of highbrow words, hitherto and henceforth and what not. The others did nothing at all. The sudden change from hunter to hunted too much for their shark-like minds. Although the easiest bath he'd ever prepared, he hated it. It took 3 accountant baths to get rid of the toxic smell. Lawyer blood emanated a horrid whiff, and it clotted at an alarming rate. It formed a thick skin on the surface that hung from his shoulders like a cloak when he climbed out of the bath. A wonderful effect visually, but damned impractical. He rarely experienced the heebie-jeebies, but those lawyers hit all the wrong buttons. He vowed never to have anything to do with that species again. It wasn't worth the hassle. He gazed upon the emaciated accountants strewn around the floor. He sometimes worried there would not be enough to keep him in bloodbath forever. The thought made him uncomfortable, and he knew it could not be ignored. Every batch got skinnier and balder than the last. Not a great sign. But he had to bathe. It was his great escape. He would begin experiments with alternative sources. Perhaps scientists were a good place to start that experimentation. It had a certain poetic justice to it. The sticky, clingy feel of congealed blood interrupted his thoughts. Cursing, he got to his hooves and stepped out of the bath. He picked up the nearest twisted body and wrapped it around his waist. He still felt good about discovering a use for the broken remains. If only he could utilise all the pairs of spectacles he had accumulated. It seemed such a waste of good honest craftsmanship to let them gather dust in his spare room. With a sigh he picked up his trident. In one last instant of escapism, he upended it and held it like a guitar. He fingered a silent pentatonic blues scale, the one he liked to play at the crossroads. Thunder rumbled in the back of his throat. Time to get back to the office. The place just fell apart without him. And that was Bloodbath, by me. I had thought I might do 2 stories today, but the Edgar Allan Poe story was a little bit longer than I had anticipated, and we're encroaching upon the half-hour mark. The next story that I have lined up is the second one in that little collection, Possession, Obsession and a Diesel Compression Engine. And it's a bit longer than the other one. It would probably take another 10 minutes or so to recite that one, and I haven't done a read-through yet. Plus, I'm absolutely sweltered by. I just want to go downstairs and turn on the fan in the kitchen and drink a big glass of ice water. So, I'm sorry, I'm going to have to love these and leave yous for now. I just can't deal with this heat. I'm not made for it, you know. I kind of miss the rain. Rain is good writing weather, you know. It's a nice sort of atmosphere banging against the windows, and you feel like there's not an awful lot much else you could be doing anyway, so why not sit at your computer? You know, the sun's a wild distraction. The heat, it makes it harder to think. My brain definitely works a lot more slowly in the sun, which would probably account for my slightly stumbly sentences today. Also, I think getting more sleep than I'm used to having is affecting that as well. I sort of feel a little bit otherworldly the last few days, you know, like I'm not quite completely within my own mind. I'm sort of off track a bit, you know, like my thoughts are sort of swollen or something. It's hard to explain, you know. I just don't feel like my brain's firing in as many cylinders as it usually does, and even my voice, I feel it's not as clear as it usually is, and it's bugging me that I have to breathe harder than I have been previously. So, yeah, it probably would be for the best for all of us if I just called it a day. Do you know what's weird? I always have this habit. It's like trying to end a phone call with an Irish guy, you know. We never know how to actually finish a conversation, you know. It's like you got to say bye 700 times before you can actually hang up. And it's like I do that at the end of every podcast. I've said cheerio a few times already. I've made my excuses. I've made it clear that it's time for me to go to do something else. But I still feel like I need to throw another wee sentence in there, you know. And I just don't get it. I think maybe it might be a good sign. It probably means that I don't want to say cheerio right now. That I feel like I have more to say and I'm going to keep on talking. But you have to give up at some point. You can't just keep on going on, especially when you're just talking utter shite like I am right now. Apologies if you have any children in the room, by the way. I keep meaning at the start of this podcast to warn that there may be the odd wee swear word dropping here or there and everywhere. Like, I'm not a total potty mouth, but some of my work does have quite a few F-bombs in it. And it's probably not fair if you have kids in your car or something that I suddenly just drop a clanger like that. But I do have the wee explicit language warning on my podcast, but I think from now on I'll try and add that into the introduction, you know. And I'll try and keep it to a minimum anyway. It's not really big and clever to swear. A person who attests to being a writer should have a bigger vocabulary to draw from, but you have to admit though, it is satisfying to say the odd fuck, you know? I mean, if you hit your thumb with a hammer, you're not going to say, oh jeepers, really, are you? It's not going to give you that same release, that same, you know? It's just got to be fuck sometimes, and that's it. Yeah, I feel like I'm gonna keep on babbling here, or just say cheerio. So, I think I'll just pick up my trusty guitar, and we shall sign off. So, thanks very much for downloading the current episode. If you'd like to support the podcast in any shape or form, the most direct way that you can do that is by ordering a copy of my novel, of which this podcast is named after. That would be the novel Disorder. It's a Belfast noir. And you can get your copy by visiting No Alibis bookstore in Belfast. That's on Botanic Avenue in Belfast, and it is a class wee shop. Or you can go to the No Alibis Press website, which is noalibispress.com. And my book's currently the only one that's available there, although I am told that there are going to be some new writers on the scene quite soon. And I've heard who they are, and I'm very, very excited about it. And you should be too. So, thank you all for listening. Yous are all sound, so yous are. Keep her lit, and I'll see yous again soon.